So hello and welcome to this short guide video. This is going to be the first video in a series of 4 talking about the 4 tier 1 healers in ESO. So this one is going to be focused on the Templar healer, and since it's the first video, I'm actually going to be talking much more about the individual skills and the choices behind it and how someone goes about gearing a healer. So please note that a lot of the stuff I talk about I'll be more thorough with in the description, where I'll also link my guide with some guides to how to gear up your healer the best possible way with wasting the least amount of time. This is the theme a lot with ESO, but it's especially true with the healers and support roles. In ESO, you tend to use a lot of open skill lines. This is the weapon skill lines, the guild skill lines, and all the open skill lines that every class has access to. And that means that a lot more classes are viable and can play at the highest level, but it also means that between the healing classes, a lot of the skills are shared, and the sort of class difference is more a question of flavor than it's a question of actual play style. We can start off by showing this by looking at my front bar. So we have 2 class skills and 4 sort of open skill lines. Now I'm going to go a bit into the abilities from the open skill lines, because these are some of the skills that are the most popular. So we look at combat prayer. This is a skill that works as a burst heal first off. It heals 6 people in front of you for about 5k healing, and it gives them minor protection and minor berserk, or minor resolve it's called. Now both of these buffs are pretty relevant in a raid. Taking 8% less damage and doing 8% more damage is pretty relevant. Now this skill's sort of been on and off because Nightblades used to have this buff from one of their core skills, but they don't anymore, and this means that this skill is more relevant than ever coming with the Elsewhere patch. So what makes this skill especially unique is that it's tied to the Asylum Staff. Now the Asylum Staff, whenever you use Combat Prayer or the other morph of Blessing of Protection, is that called that? Yeah, it's called Blessing of Protection, yeah. You get a 30% cost reduction on your next healing abilities. And this sort of plays very, very well into sort of the playstyle of a healer. So you imagine you cast this ability and then the next 2 abilities are reduced in cost. Now the next ability is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, single ability in the game. It's called Energy Orbs, and they are sort of the primary sustain tool for your group. Because healing is not a strictly healing role but more of a support role, your job is to provide sustain to the group, and this is your way of doing it with all healing classes. Now whenever this ability is activated, the group gains a huge burst heal, and the activator of the synergy also gains the resources, and this is how it works as a sustain tool. Now there's not much more to say about the healing orbs, but the fact that they heal the group and give sustain at the same time is why they are so powerful. Now the last skill is Healing Springs, and Healing Springs is one of those few skills where either morph is very powerful. I'm going to talk a bit about the Healing Springs morph because this is the most popular morph, and the reason why it's the most popular morph is that it gives you a lot more sustain. It basically works the way that Healing Springs is the morph where you get about 1/3 of the cost back every time you cast it on 3 or more people, and the other morph called Illustrious Healing lasts for 1 extra second, which means that it goes from 3 to 4 seconds, and this is about this is an exact 1/3 increase. So you imagine you either have a morph that is 33% cheaper, or you have a morph that is 33% stronger. And it's first off, it's a debate of choice and playstyle, but it's also a debate of trial for a lot of healers. A lot of people like to use this skill in a trial like Hold of Fabrication, where you tend to want to push out a lot of orbs because it's stacked fights, and they tend to like healing springs for the fights where they tend to use healing springs more. So you imagine if you're gonna use this skill a lot, you'd rather have the sustain, and if you want to use it as little as possible, you'd rather have the extra healing. So these three skills makes up what I call the core sort of healer rotation. So it starts off with the Blessing of Protection, giving you the cost reduction, then you cast an orb, and then you cast your healing springs. Now this has to be gone within a 3-second window to get the full buff of it. But this is the basic rotation of a healer in ESO. Now, you can of course mix it up throwing some different skills, but this is the general healer rotation on your front bar whenever you're not on your back bar. So on your front bar I have 2 other abilities, and these are some of the strongest Templar abilities. So let's talk about Breath of Life. Breath of Life is the strongest single target burst heal in the game, healing for an insane amount. And it also happens to work in a cone. Now this is a thing a lot of people don't seem to understand about Breath of Life. It works in a cone in front of you. That means that when I'm healing Panadulak, who is sitting here in my house, he's getting the full heal. Now if I heal behind me like this, you might see Pana getting hit. Okay, let's see how much it takes. So you're seeing Pana getting hit. You can see here, once he's within 180 degrees, he's getting hit. As soon as he's sort of not within the 180 degrees, he's no longer getting hit. Now it's cheating a bit, because I'm actually throwing the heal in this direction, which means I'm getting the primary heal, and Pana is only getting the secondary heal. So if you really want to heal people for the full amount with your Breath of Life, you need to make sure that you're at least aiming in that general direction. Now it doesn't matter if you deviate a bit, but if you want to give him the major heal, which is the first heal for 9k and not the heal for 3000, which is about 1/3, you want to make sure that you're aiming at them. It's a bit of a myth, the fact that Breath of Life is this omniscient burst heal that you can just cast in any direction. Now the second spot I have right here is the Power of the Light ability. Now the Power of the Light ability is sort of put onto the healer role. It's actually a stamina morph, and a lot of Templar, which is the stamina DD version of a Templar, they used to carry this ability a lot, but now it's sort of become the healer's job to sort of keep this up. Now the Power of the Light has a lot of aspects to it and a lot of reasons why it's strong. The first is the debuff that it applies to the target, which is Minor Fracture and Minor Breach. These are some of the rarest debuffs, if not the rarest, at least, penetration debuff in the game. It applies it for about 9 seconds, which means that if you just want to keep that up, you actually don't need to keep up the ability 100%. This was a change that came with the Elsewhere patch. But what's more important about it is the tree that it comes from. Now this is the Dolmens tree, and there's a lot of abilities in it, but it has 2 passives. The first one is the Illuminate passive. Now this gives your group minor sorcery, which lasts for 20 seconds and increases spell damage done by 10%. Now any DD worth their salt playing a Templar is gonna have some ability from this tree. So if you have a lot of Templar DDs in your group, don't worry so much about this buff. Now if you don't have it, it's very important that you cast an ability from this bar at least every 20 seconds, which could be like Reflective Light or Power of the Light. Power of the Light is the better ability of the 2. Now the second passive that's important is the Present passive, which is your ultimate sustainability. One of the reasons why Templars are so powerful and popular is because they can choke out a lot of Warhorns or a lot of ultimates, and the Prison passive is really the reason for this. So if you want to keep up this Prison passive 100%, you actually have to cast Power of the Light on cooldown if possible. You can't just do it every 9 seconds, but this is more of a question of your stamina sustain anyways. So the last ability on your front bar might be a barrier. This is a very common thing to do with healers, is to wear a dead slot on your front bar. Now barrier is one of the more popular morphs, and the reason is solely the magic 8 passive, so you get 10% recovery. Other option would be to wear something like the Solar Prism. Now this is not going to give you anything, but what it's going to do is that the Solar Prism is a good sort of group utility buff on something like Trash, or if you have issues clearing a boss because of a damage phase like an execute phase in Hoth. This gives the targets made your main for quite a long time, so this is a very popular front bar morph as well to wear on a healer. But if you're not going to use anything, if you just want to keep using your wand, which I suggest you do, just slot a barrier, get the 10% magic regen. If you don't feel you need the sustain, double slot wand, because we're all humans and we might actually cast the wrong ultimate by mistake. So moving on to the back bar. The back bar here you see here is sort of a common back bar, but I'm going to talk a bit about how you actually set it up. So the first thing that we see on the back bar is the Overflowing Altar. Now this is a sort of a strong guild ability, and Overflowing Altar sort of plays into the Elemental Drain ability as well, since they both sort of last an equal amount of time. Usually what happens is that one healer keeps up the altar, the tanks really want the synergy, and the other healer keeps up Elemental Drain. So you imagine your back bar could look like this as well. A second ability, which is the most important back bar ability on any tree, is the Elemental Blockade, and I'm going to talk a bit about why exactly you keep this up, because a lot of people don't exactly understand all the factors of why this ability is as important as it is. So first off balance, let's look into the tree of CPs on the CP tree. The Exploiter passive is a passive that gives you 10% damage on off balance enemies. Now, it used to be that healers would, both healers and magic DDs and everyone would slot 75% in Thaumaturge, or at least have 75% points slotted in the tree. So magic DDs would put 75 points into Thaumaturge, since this is the only benefit they can really get from this tree. But stamina DDs, no matter which stamina DD you are, even if you are slotting your like a ton of points in the Atronach for Master of Arms and whatever, you're always going to have at least 75 points slotted in this ritual tree. And that means that every single stamina DD in your group is going to have the Exploited passive unlocked. Now this is actually a pride of a significant buff. 10% damage is a lot, so what you want is that you really want as much off balance as possible. Now how do you get off balance? Now off balance only procs of shock damage, or can proc of shock damage, and why it can do that is because shock damage gives concussion to the enemy. This is sort of the benefactor of concussion. Now what concussion do is that it gives the target minor vulnerability, and I know there's a lot of things going on. I'm going to clear it up. And once they have concussion, the sort of the destruction staff wall of elements can put the enemy off balance while they are concussed for 5 seconds. Now 5 seconds is quite a lot. I can't remember the exact maximum off balance uptime you can actually get, but it's quite a lot, something like 25%. So imagine you want to do shock damage so that you can put them under concussion. Concussion gives you the ability to put them off balance. So from shock damage to concussion to off balance. Now the minor vulnerability is a bit of an off benefactor. This is why almost every single healer is going to be wearing a destruction staff back bar, not only for the elemental drain, but also because you want to have as many lightning walls in the group as possible. And this is also one of the reasons why lightning walls became so popular on tanks, because you imagine you have 8 stamina DDs in a group, so you only have 4 supports left that have to provide 75% off balance. Now Are you in a group with tons of magic DDs, and some of them might be something like a pet sorg with some sort of shock build? They might be providing some blockade of storms, but in far the most groups in ESO right now, you're gonna be seeing something like at least 6 stamina DDs, and usually 8. So 6 to 8 is the average number, I'd say, even among groups that are just doing some casual vet trial runs. So there are more things going into reaching the maximum concussion uptime, and I'm gonna explain that now. It has a lot to do with the traits of your staves, traits and engines. So what you want on a healer, and this doesn't matter which set you're running, you want a infused backbar lightning staff with a shock enchant. Now you want this because whenever you cast your wall, this is going to be proccing your shock enchant. Infused is going to proc it a lot. So imagine you doing this, you proc a lot of shock enchants with your wall. Very practical that the tool that gives you off balance also helps you proc shock enchants, which gives you a concussion. Now on your front bar, which is the bar you're going to be spending the majority of your time, you want charge. Because while usually front bar enchants can't affect your back bar enchants, charge can. Because when you then go to your front bar, you proc your shock enchant, you proc your wall, which is also lightning damage, by the way, you're gonna have 220% higher chance of proccing the concussion status effect. That means you have 220% higher chance of actually bringing in the off balance debuff or status effect, I guess it's called. So imagine I have my big ass boss there, I wall him, go to my front bar, and it's gonna start setting him off balance. That's very convenient. Now, I don't exactly know how this boss works with the off balance, but usually you'll see the guy being concussed above his head whenever he's off balance. So, now that I'm done talking about the wall, let's talk a bit about the other abilities on your back bar. Now, the wall is the most important one. I also think it's the most misunderstood one. So Ritual is a typical back bar buff. You'll see this with every single healer class. You'll have some back bar buffs. Now the Ritual is also the class synergy for the Templar. This is the unique class synergy that's not tied to an ultimate. Now what the Ritual does is that it heals everyone in the area, it cleanses yourself for 5 harmful effects, and whenever someone in the area has some sort of debuff, they can proc a synergy of the Ritual. Now I mentioned synergies earlier with the altar and also did with the orbs. Now synergies are very, very important in ESO because they are the main group play sort of mechanic that we have. So the synergies are not tied to global cooldowns, and they work just by pressing X. And a lot of sets like Alkarsh, like the new Lokesti set from the Sunspire trial, gives DDs major buffs whenever they proc them. Now they also get a bit of sustain from the Undaunted passive, but what most important is the fact that they get very, very powerful set buffs. So what you want is that you want your healers to give a lot of synergies. Healer classes are often chosen specifically on the fact that they have synergies that no one else in the group can bring. So the Ritual is a very important class synergy, and it's very important whenever you're playing a Templar that this thing stays up 100%. Tanks will literally bring themselves in harm's way to proc Ritual. That's just how important the buff is, or the synergy is. Now the Blazing Spears, they work like orbs in the fact that they give you resources back. You just saw me proccing it here, because this thing throws spears at you, but most importantly they can be aimed, whereas the orbs, usually they'll travel through the group, and if you have 8 DDs all hungering for an orb pop, that might not make it to the tank, and the tank might just need an orb pop now, either for Alkarsh or even just to purely survive. And that's why we're wearing the shards. Now this is an ability you can take off for some fights, but I still recommend that you slot it, just because it's quite convenient. and I'll go a bit into why it's also quite convenient later. So channel focus is the Templar sustain tool. Now a lot of classes in ESO have different sustain tools. This is our sustain tool, and it gives us magic a break per second. The cool thing about it is that it also works as our main survivability tool, so you sort of get 2 in 1. This is also our main sort of, I call them flex spots usually. So this is sort of the spot where if I need a bone shield, that's where it's gonna go. If I need spiders, that's where it's gonna go. If I need some other skill that might be convenient, let's say I need a speed buff or a stun or something else, this is usually the spot where I'm gonna slot something else. So, but channel focus is definitely not a skill that should be underrated. Now the last skill is the aggressive Warden. Now this is the main sort of ultimate of supports in ESO. Now why it is that is the fact that it gives major force, increasing your critical damage by 15% for 9 seconds. With 4 supports using this ultimate, it comes out quite a lot of group DPS. Now what it also gives is a major buff to your max magic and max stamina, and this is really the reason why aggressive Warden is the chosen ultimate, because if you can manage 4 Wardens, which is it usually is with 4 supports, you can have 100% uptime on the maximum stat buffs, and you can have good uptimes on major force. And in PvE specifically, a lot of DDs spec into crit, so the major force is still a huge benefactor in their sort of overall deep group DPS. So this is sort of a must to have, and the other sort of ultimates that you're looking at, especially the Remembrance, is not very good for PvE, but the Solar Prison could be useful in some situations, so keep that in mind. And that's pretty much it for the sort of the skills and an introduction. So moving on to gear. Now right now I've sort of combined a setup that I believe makes it possible to clear all content in the game in ESO, like trial content, on a healer. Now that's both true and not true, so I'm gonna go a bit into why it's true. Now the 2 sets I'm wearing are Infallible Aether and Olorime. So let's talk about Olorime. I've talked about this set quite a few times, I think, and I'm not gonna go too much into detail about it, but Olorime is the best source of major courage, no questions asked, and it works basically by placing ground AoEs. Now if you're a PC user, I really recommend that you get yourself the add-on literally called Olorime. It's made by Wheels, and what it does is that it shows you a little number at the bottom. I place mine close to my health bars because this is where my eyes usually are, and this basically counts your Olorime uptime. So imagine every time this hits 0, it's ready to be proc. Now it can proc off a lot of ground AoEs, including the ritual which I just showed, and the more convenient one, the shard. So let's imagine we are running over here for a trash pack, and I can throw the Olorime head, and then everyone can run into it as they engage a trash pack. Very convenient, and I definitely recommend that you get this add-on. I'm gonna link it in the description down below. Now the other set is Infallible Aether, and I talked a bit about how you proc the effect that this set gives. Now this set gives you minor vulnerability. Now if you listened while I was explaining the mechanics of off balance, you'll know that if you do any shock damage, you'll proc concussion, and concussion will lead to minor vulnerability. Now because of the fact that we are only 2 support healers, maybe trying to proc some off balance, and maybe a single tank, the uptime of minor vulnerability is not gonna reach the uptimes that we want, which is 90 to 100%. How do we get around this? We get around this with Infallible Aether. Now in the vast majority of groups, there's not gonna be a Magicka DD to heavy attack because the vast majority of groups are consisting of stamina DDs. So if you have a team consisting of 5 pet stalks with lightning staffs, backbar, proccing a lot of minor vulnerability, don't bother with this set. Now if you're playing in 90% of the other teams, which is the vast majority of players, you will want to have IA or Infallible Aether to proc this debuff. Now it procs very easily, and it's one of the reasons why it's very popular, because it's so easy to use. What you do is that you medium attack the target till you see a purple glow. Now I'm a bit stupid because this trial dummy already has debuffs, so I'm just gonna go over here. There we go. Procced, you see the purple glow, and then you know it's procced. Now Untaunted on the right side of the screen also tracks this particular debuff. It lasts for 10 seconds, and you just need to barely touch the target to proc the debuff. So the reason why I said it's not exactly true that this is good enough to do all content in the game is because most groups tend to split these two sets between the two healers in the group. Now why do they do that? Well, first off, both sets require some active use. This requires a medium attack. The Olorime requires you to go on your backbar most of the time if you're wearing a backbar to proc. Now this costs a lot of global cooldowns. Global cooldowns is how we track how effective you are as a player in ESO. We cannot do that because every single skill that you cast costs a global cooldown. Now there's a global cooldown on every single skill in ESO of 1 second. That means once you cast an ability, you have 1 second where you cannot cast abilities, and then you can cast a new one. So if you're going to be doing a lot of bar swapping back and forth to proc Olorime and a lot of medium attacks which can cost a global cooldown, then you're going to lose a lot of global cooldowns overall, and that means you're a lot less effective. Now the second reason, which is the more true reason, is the fact that we're still human players and humans can lose focus. And now if you're going to be doing a lot of your average healer rotation, but you also have to be doing a lot of heavy attacking, a lot of proccing Olorime. You might have 2 groups of DDs, that means you suddenly have to start proccing Olorime across the map. You're going to be losing some uptimes, and there's really no good reason why you shouldn't split the sets so that each healer has less to focus on. So let's talk a bit about the monster set, Bogdan's. Now Bogdan's is the most powerful healer monster set. It does the most healing of any of the monster sets, and it procs constantly, and the total effect of the proc, which is sort of a totem coming down from the sky like it came from Jesus Christ, is about the same healing as 3 healing springs stacked upon each other. It's very powerful, very potent. You won't ever need another set. Now there are other sets, and I'm going to be talking a bit about those. Now the first set that comes to a lot of people's mind is Earthgore. Now Earthgore is sort of a set that's been nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed, and it's at a state now where it's a single target burst heal that can proc every 35 seconds, and it does still cleanse the boundaries, so it's still a good set, Earthgore. It's not completely terrible, but it's very much in a PvE context, it's very much outshined by Bogdan's. Now the other sets are very much tied to sustain. Sentinel of Recognize is a very strong sustain set in very tight stacked fights like the Rakatan Mall or something like Assembly General in Half, and generally all the Crackdown trials. So imagine you're doing a Crackdown trial, and as long as you have 6 or 8 stamina DDs, which you will have in most cases, this set is really great. Symphony of Blades is more of a hybrid sustain tool, which seems to be the way Sauce wants to go, where you can work on both stamina and Magicka DDs. So imagine you have the same scenario as Recognize, but you have 5 Magicka DDs, then you're gonna be wearing Symphony of Blades but it also works in trials like Asylum Sanctorium and something like Cloud Rest, where you still see a lot of groups using a huge group of Magicka DDs. This set is great. It's not as great as recognized as long as there is any sort of stacking of the DDs. That has to be said. But it has its place. So, another thing about Magicka or healer setups is that the jewelry enchants that I like to use is 1 spell damage and 2 Magicka recovery glyphs. Now this is very much a playstyle choice. Now if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're like, okay, I'm really running out of Magicka, the first place to look for more sustain is in your jewelry enchants, because this is cheap and effective and can practically be done mid-trial. Now for body enchants, you really want to hit a sweet spot around 17.5k HP. Now the best way I found to do this was to wear 3 tri-stack glyphs. This helps sustaining something like Power of the Light, and then the rest of the pieces you go Magicka, and then you go 5-1-1. Now 5-1-1 is the weight of the armor. You imagine 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy, and then you invest, and this gives you the 6% maximum bonus from the Undaunted Metal passive. This will boost all your stats and will bring you up to quite a healthy number of both Magicka, stamina and health. So other sets than the 2 sets mentioned here that you then can swap out, because as I said, you're most likely going to be only wearing one of them. Now the first one is Javis Guidance. Javis Guidance is a very much healer focused set that gives you Magicka recovery, and it gives a 5-piece buff that basically gives you your buffs, like the major and minor buffs, a 40% increase. Now you don't have too many of those as a Templar, but what you mainly want it for is the aggressive Warhunt, which is then going to be lasting almost 13 seconds. Other sets for progressing trials, let's imagine you're very new to healing, is something like the Mending. So Mending is my first choice that you should go for if you're progressing trials. The debuff that it does to the enemies is quite significant in terms of damage taken, and it's still something that a lot of even endgame groups go to as a way of dealing with hard mechanics while the group is still learning. And the Sanctuary set is the one I will recommend the least, because the range of the Sanctuary set is incredibly short, and a healing receive buff is usually not very useful when talking PvE, because a lot of the healing that you'll be doing is significant overhealing. So imagine adding 12% when you're already doing 40% overhealing is not gonna help at all. So that's pretty much it about sets. Now there are sets like Turok's Pact and Hercene and Worm, which I've talked about before. Worm is a sustain tool for Magicka, Hercene is the sustain tool for stamina. Something like Turok's Pact and Eben, which I have here, I've talked about in a specific video, and I'm talking about it's called Frankenstein sets, and it goes about more into how you're specifically built for these sets, because they require you to wear some sometimes different food, sometimes different enchants. So I recommend you go and watch that video if you want to know a bit about how you implement these sets on a healer. It's not something that you should be doing if you're a brand new player. If you're a brand new player, go get Olorime, go get Infallible Aether, go get Jorvulds Guidance, go get Worm, and consider getting either Mending and Sanctuary for the first progression you're doing in a trial, and then take them off as you get more comfortable. So let's quickly talk about passives. Now passives are the thing that makes you powerful in ESO. This is what makes the difference. Now the Templar has quite a few passives. I already talked about the Illuminate and Prison, and when you go through a healer, a general rule is that you just want all the class passives, you want all the destruction, restoration passives, you want the light armor passives, you want the 3 strong medium armor passives, the 3 first heavy armor passives. Then you want to be a vampire. Now vampires, you generally want to be at stage 2 for most content, stage 3 for some content, and never stage 4 whenever doing trials, unless you know that you can stay alive and don't want to waste a food buff. I do not recommend wasting food buffs for something like a Sanctum run. Now, these sort of the only guild passive that you really need is the Undaunted guild passive. I recommend farming up Mage's Guild because Inner Light is still a strong flag spot on your front bar if you don't have anything other useful to run. Get the support up to level 9 if you want to, but you can just level up to level 6 if you don't want to do a massive amount of PvP. Then you'll only get half of the Magic Aid passive, and you might want to consider just double running Warden forever. As a race, you want to be a Breton for min-maxing. The other 2 options are Argonians and Olorime. These are not as good in terms of sustain, but they'll get you through most content, so just consider that. Bretons are the best, the others are sort of tier 2 classes or races. Now, for the sort of crafting skill lines, you always want medicinal use. This is probably the most annoying thing to do in the game, is wasting something like 50,000 gold every time you want to level up a new character. So, champion points. Now, champion points in ESO are sort of like the thing that people tend to copy pasta the most, even though they should copy pasta it the least. Now, on a healer, you pretty much always want something like a 76-81 split on your 2 healing passives. Now, these are the only sort of healing increasing passives that you have in the CP tree. The reason why you don't want to invest 100 into Blessed is the fact that 1% healing done is practically nothing. And the reason why you don't want to invest more into Elfborn is that you also only get 1% more, which is not a lot. Especially because you don't invest a lot into crit on a healer. And the particular reason why you don't do that is that it's no longer affected by something like Major Force or Minor Force. So crit healing is a very dead thing in ESO, unfortunately. Now, the rest of the blue tree, you want to invest into damage, however you find it most useful. I like to invest a lot into pen and the shock damage effects, and then a little bit into the different direct trees and Atronach. And then I like to invest a bit into Thaumaturge just to have some damage over time, since this is mainly what you're doing with your wall. I don't recommend going for the 75 points for the off-balance buff, it's not worth it. But generally these passives that are outside of just the healing passives don't do a huge difference, but you don't want to waste the rest of your points maxing these out when you can get a tiny bit of damage outside of. Now, the red trees, I recommend that you always space on the trial that you're in. So it's very easy to just completely copy paste some random setup from some random YouTube video and then go into a trial that's got a completely different damage setup. Your red tree should always be trial based. Now, if you refuse to do that, I recommend that you split Elemental and Hardy evenly, and you have about these numbers into Ironclad and Thick Skin. Now, 23 points is very useful in the Lord tree, specifically quick recovery. Because you're a healer, you're going to be usually be the person to take the very most healing from yourself, so why not bump this up? But it also gives you a rank 10, is it? Yeah, at rank, once you have 10 points in, you get a sort of a bonus where you take less damage when you resurrect. Now, as a Templar, you also have a passive that makes you resurrect faster and give them more resources, specifically health. So you imagine it scales pretty well with being a Templar. So this is sort of a small trick, especially when progressing trials you're going to be resing, so why not make it a bit easier for yourself? Now, this goes for the Lord tree a bit like the red tree. The Lord tree should be mainly focused on whichever is the highest stamina drain in the trial. So you imagine something like VAS. There is literally not a single mechanic that makes you have to break free. Literally not a single one. So why would you invest a fuck ton of points into Warlord? So I imagine Warlord is usually, if you really want a split, that's like normal, you're looking at something like 28, maybe even more points into Warlord. Let's just max it out. Let's see how far we can go up. Now CPs still work with the jump points. There are something like Sprinter doesn't have jump points, but something like Warlock does. Now, one thing you want to be constant is Arcanist. You want 75 points in. Always want 75 points into Arcanist. You don't want 100 because you don't want to waste 25 points for 1%. Now, CP are front loaded again, so don't max out 100 on the things you think you need the most, because then you're just throwing CP into the bin and not using them mostly. Now on a healer, because of the restoration stuff passive that gives you extra resources, you actually want quite a lot into tenacity. This will help you get a huge amount of resources back and makes heavy attacks quite useful. And in the shadow tree, I like to have 80 points, because blocking is a mechanic that's in every single trial, and roll dodging is the easiest way of getting out of harm's way in ESO. So why would you not want a lot of stamina sustain from these two? And then again, Warlord only if there are a lot of break free mechanics, and Sprinter is where you put the rest of your points. So sprinting in ESO is a very common thing to do, and especially healers with 8 orcs now on stamina DDs, you really want your sprint to be cheap, because you're going to be sprinting a lot to catch up with them. So this was shortly the CPs. Please don't copy past the CPs. It's very easy to look up red CPs for a trial. There are a lot of guides. Alcast has done a lot of guides for red CPs, and sort of for the green tree, this is actually requires quite a lot of your sort of thinking about the mechanics in the fight, and maybe even looking up your ESO logs. What is the biggest stamina drain for me in this trial? And then you base all the other points than the 75 points you invest in Arcanist on the stamina drains. So that's pretty much it. So wrapping things up, I want to talk a bit about the playstyle. The Templar is sort of the paladin and priest of ESO, if you've ever played World of Warcraft. And what really makes it strong is the fact that it can fulfill all the roles in sort of healing. There are sort of two splits of healers. There are the group healers who are strong at healing the group and keeping them alive, and then there are the healers who are strong at sort of debuffing, half damage dealing. And the Templar is sort of right in the middle, because it's got a very powerful debuff, but it's also got the ritual, which is sort of a very good survivability of the tool of the group. So it's sort of the jack of all trades, master of none, sort of can do everything to a really high standard, and that is also why it is the most popular healing role in ESO. And that's also why I recommend, if you're ever gonna play a healer in ESO, if you want to get into it, make a Templar. You've got the best burst heal, you've got reasons why it will always be relevant, and it's got the unique synergy. So there's never gonna be a time in ESO, I think, ever where Templar healer isn't good. It's just never gonna happen. It's always gonna be a tier 1 healer, it's always gonna be the most popular, and it's always gonna be the best go-to class, because it's so intuitive and frankly easy to play, but not necessarily being easier than the others. It's just so intuitive to go to and very comfortable to play. So that's sort of what the Templar is, the most comfortable and most intuitive class to play, and totally should be the first class that any healer picks up in ESO. Then once you've played the Templar, once you've learned a bit about healing, then you move on to the other classes, and that's also why I chose the Templar to be the first video in this series, so that this is what people come to and learn about first. I hope that you found this video sort of useful. I know maybe it's been a bit long, a bit ranty, but I wanted to go through these few things, and if you have any questions, you can ask them down below. I'll make sure to answer them as quickly as I can, and that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.